We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power coming to you on a late summer day, but by the time you watch this, it will be the autumn, and I'll be putting this up while we are doing our gathering in Georgia. And this is another of my explorations in reality. I did one about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. Year and a half ago or so, and I enjoyed doing that. I just haven't done any more since then. Meanwhile, I've had the material sitting around to certainly do another one, and so this is going to be something which originally appeared on my Georgian Crossroad channels in 4 different parts, but what I'm doing here is presenting it all as one 4-part story for you, because I'm sure a lot of you have never seen it. And this is about just a simple bus trip, staying in a little village at the end of a bus ride, exploring the village a bit, and then walking home. So simple. I spent 3 days there, and the whole point of this was almost an exercise in the mundane. What can you do if you go to the end of the line and walk home? Having said that, I think I saw a lot more when I was on this trip. So I hope you find this interesting. Do remember, I do need your support for the channel. I don't get any direct money from YouTube or sponsors or anything like that. So if you feel like contributing, look below. You'll see a link to support the channel. 2 actually. There's one for my GoFundMe page as well. Either works. If you want to give more and want a tax-deductible receipt, that's the place to go. And I can certainly use it. I still have to get out there and get my stuff back. Sometime between the time I record this and the time that this airs, I will have done my crowdfunder, so we'll see. Maybe the money has come in. Also, hey, hit like. Let the algorithms know. If they know anything about me, I think sometimes I'm in some sort of zone where I just stay here. And the only way I'm going to get out of that zone is if you share some of my videos with your friends. Let more people know about this channel. Yeah. You can hit the notification bell so you know when my new videos drop. And you can come along with me on a bus ride right now up to the little town of Kojori, just above Tbilisi, literally above Tbilisi. And I'll explain that in the video. Come on. Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I am going to be
making a bit of an experiment today with taking a mini vacation from Tbilisi. And I'm going to do it Airbnb, $30 a night. That's not too expensive. And in fact, I got a bit of a discount on it. 3 nights, and I'm going about, 20 kilometers, 15 miles or so to the little village of Kojori, which is up and up and up and up. And I'll explain more about the terrain as we go. But I'm traveling for the cost of 1 ticket on my metro pass or bus pass. And that's 35 cents one way. So we'll see what we can do. I've already got the apartment rented, or the house rented for me. And I'm thinking about walking back. And I will keep you posted as that. At this moment, I'm not sure what's going to happen. It's kind of an overcast day, which is good for walking back, because I don't want to be out. And it looks like it'll be that way for a few days. I don't want to walk back in the middle of a hot, sweltering day, because I'll just get turned into a piece of toast. But I'm looking forward to just getting away and having a vacation. Come along with me. Let's see what happens. So first we have to get a bus. And to get a bus, you look at the signs, the little signs in every bus stop, most every bus stop. There are a few that don't have them, but they will switch back and forth into Latin script every now and then. And so you need to keep your eyes open. And here I see the 380 going to Kojori. And that is the bus I want. And it's going to be between 45 minutes and, depending on the traffic, 50 minutes, 55 minutes to get up there from Liberty Square or Baratashvili's street. I would recommend getting it at Baratashvili because there'll be fewer people there. So I left Vake and picked up the bus, got off at Baratashvili, and then looked for the 380 and took it out of town. And this is a pretty scenic part of the city, so it's worth looking outside, keeping your eyes on the buildings that you pass. A lot of old buildings as the bus goes through Sololaki. Liberty Square, Tavisuplebis Moedani. And this is Sololaki, which has a lot of older buildings. I love walking through Sololaki. And by the way, if you haven't found it yet, I did do a video on just walking through Sololaki and looking at a lot of the old architecture there, the kind of decayed Art Nouveau structures. Now we're getting ready to go up and up and up on the road to Kojori. And basically, this is all uphill from Tbilisi. And if you keep a lookout on either side, because the bus will zigzag back and forth, you'll get great views of Tbilisi as you go. And what is that abandoned piece of architecture there? And on the way, there will be one stop for Okrokana, which is the little town that leads up to Matatsaminda Park. But essentially, these are the Lesser Caucasus. And the Lesser Caucasus are, when you climb Matatsaminda Park,
or hike up there, you think you're at the top. And then you look on and you see, oh no, it keeps going up and up and up. And that's what the Lesser Caucasus are like. They're not straight up and down like the Greater Caucasus. So as you travel, you're constantly kind of going up and down, then more up. And Kojori is one of the summits, but it keeps going eventually further up past Kojori as well. A little bit of roadside gas station, a Dunkin', formerly Dunkin' Donuts. And we'll pass the cutoff for another town, Tbilisi, on the way. But I've never actually been there, so I have absolutely nothing to say about it. All of this is going to be for one lari. 6 months ago, it was for half a lari, but prices have gone up. But that's still pretty cheap for us, but that doubles the price. So I've gone through Tabak Mela, and now I'm up at Kojori. Here, I'll put them out in meters here. And that's a little sign that says Kojori, and then, oh, I didn't have time to read that, but you didn't probably read it anyway, unless you were Georgian. But there's this one straight ahead path here that I take, and it just goes down this one street. I could have gone further up and gotten off in the center of town, but I would have missed all these kids playing around. But I'm glad I walked this way rather than go up to the other stop, because it gave me a chance to pass this park where there were quite a few children playing, and they were playing a little game of football. And then I walked down this road. No, it wasn't as wobbly as I make it. I was just walking and experimenting with styles here, evidently failing. But this was the place I eventually arrived at. And I went downstairs, kind of mid-level in this house, and stayed there. So I arrived in Kojori probably around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But then I took a walk up to the center of town, which was actually a bit of a hike, straight uphill, but I really enjoyed going up the road, looking back past the painted trash cans into the valley near the area. But this is what it looked like. There was this one house here I really liked. I liked the brickwork on it. And you'll notice you don't really see into the houses. For some reason, Georgians are open, but when you walk by their houses, they're all completely fenced in with usually stone fences, so you can't see what's going on in the house. Every now and then, though, you can. This was a theater that really caught my attention, and I kind of peeked into it, and this is the little archway that leads into it. But I'm going to save that for the third video in my series here, so come back for the theater. Meanwhile, there is a bus stop indeed in the center of Kojori. I could have gotten off there and walked down, but actually I preferred what I did. I showed it to you on the map. And so this is the center of town, and this is just looking around, and there's the cars. There's only 2 stores, places to buy food. Well, 3. There's a woman that has a little vegetable stand. And then there is a Spar and a Nikora, which are both chain stores that have food. The Nikora was the better store. And this is the fountain at the center of town. It wasn't working. It will be working in our next video. So come back just to watch the fountain work. But I like that kind of weird green color. But right next to it, in the same building as the Spar, this chain store, small convenience store, was this wonderful Soviet-era mural made out of stones. Essentially, this is some sort of tiled mural, but with pieces that are much bigger than your usual tile. I don't know the name of that style. But the Soviets were really into these murals. And this one shows a church, shows grapevines, shows flowers, looks like pomegranates, the sun. There's a fortress in the town, which we're going to try to get to tomorrow. And, of course, Georgians dancing and celebrating, and wine, and fascinating stuff. One of the things I've liked about traveling all over Georgia is finding these murals that have been left behind from the Soviet era. And I'm glad they're there. They are much better than the kind of dull postmodern accessories that you find these days. So these are kids, teenagers, waiting to take a bus down to Tabakomela, the next town, which does have stores and a restaurant and such. There are no restaurants here, unfortunately, in Kojori. But this also goes down to where they're probably going, Tbilisi. And just to let you know, this bus does come about every 20 minutes. There's either this bus or the 390, which goes all the way to Kiketi, which I recommend also as an interesting place to visit. But when you're at the bus stop and you look around, you'll see, again, a lot of decayed ruins of buildings. My feeling was that Kojori used to be someplace that had much more of a center, and it has since disappeared. And this is looking across the street from the bus stop. And again, almost every building I'm looking at, it's either someone started to build something or it's an old building that started to decay. And it's a lot of unfinished things, which is odd, really odd, because Kojori is actually a great place to live. And people have spent good money on homes there. It's actually kind of expensive to buy a home in Kojori. By Georgian standards, not by American standards, but certainly the Georgians would feel the price of it. And there's the bus. And up there is the fortress. We'll look at that more closely at another point. But as you're walking, you also see relics from the past. These old wooden buildings with Art Nouveau ornamentation. Fascinating. Now, one thing that's really interesting is that this Art Nouveau period in Georgia came in at the end of the Russian Empire period. And when the Russian Empire collapsed, Georgia was independent for 3 years. And they continued this modern trend. What was modern then is now antique to us. But alas, then the Red Army came in and the Soviets took over, and Kojori was one of the last places where they had soldiers fighting the Red Army. And it was actually these young cadets called the Junkeri or Yunkeri or Yunkebi or something like that. Yunkerabi or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But the main street is called, it looks like Junkeri Street. It's Yunkeri Street. Well, is it Junkeri Street? Something like that. And
And so this is another interesting building, fenced off, but just walking along the side of the street, you come across all these ruins. It's interesting. There's a lot of great homes surrounding the center of this town. They call these little towns daba, but there's almost nothing in the center. It's like empty. Very strange, because an American would take this and realize instantly, if this was an American town, that center is like gold. And, you could have more stores there, because the people who live there are, far away in many ways. It's a good 15-minute drive to the next small town, let alone Tbilisi. But this is looking over. There's the fortress way in the background. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. But this is overlooking the, what do we call it? It's not quite suburban sprawl, but it's just a really lovely little town. Really needs a developed downtown. And this is the forest, which Kojori is largely in forest. There are some grasslands, but mostly forests. And so I'm going to walk through the forest to get back to where I was staying. And these are largely pine trees and other deciduous trees. There's actually an animated movie called Dreams of the Kojori Forest, but we'll talk about that when we spend more time in the forest. This is a monastery. It's got this lovely rock surface. There's another chapel as well, and a place for the monks. Look at these old tombstones. I don't know if they're tombstones. Some sort of, maybe stelas, in the old Greek sense of the word. Look at these figures. It's just very mysterious. I don't know what they represent at all, except that they're probably soldiers. They've got blades. They're carrying some sort of knife or something on them. But fascinating, really fascinating. So I did not go up the stairs to the top of this because I didn't feel I should. And actually, this trail had a fence going in and out to keep, I think, the cows out, because there's a big problem in Georgia. There's a lot of cows, which we will meet soon, just wandering around, and they can go anywhere that's not fenced off, which may explain all the fences that are around people's houses. But I don't think that's the only explanation. And this is probably the old rectory. But again, this building, it looked like it had been started and just completely left unfinished. And this is going just a little ways out from the monastery, and it kind of opened up into a dry field. This was someone graffitiing the monastery, which was really a shame, but I thought I would show it because it's, you need to see the whole thing, not just the pretty parts. And this was actually directly above the house I was staying in. And this is just a panoramic shot. We're eventually going to see the fortress again. There it is, out there. Let's try to get there. And then, after taking a break for a couple hours, I went out again as the light was changing and the sun was going down. And I saw an area at the beginning of the town where these switchbacks were coming in, where I'd gotten out, that looked like an interesting place to explore. And so I walked down the road that I walked in on, and this is that road, and I walked towards the Kojori highway, although highway is stretching the term. But a lot of the highways that go through the mountains here are just two-lane roads, much like Alaska. And you see a bus off in the corner picking people up off in the distance. Older man walking down the road. But I saw these electrical power plants, and they kind of interested me, but not as much as the cows. So I decided to wait for the cows to pass. And the cow herders are coming up from behind. I am not sure what kind of cows the Georgians have here. They are not massive beef or even dairy cows. They're just they're kind of scrawny actually, and yet a lot of beef comes from these for Georgia. And there are cows up in the high Caucasus on both sides of the Caucasus, the greater and the lesser. But eventually, we're gonna share a word or two with the cow herders. I want to call them cowboys, but they're not really cowboys. They don't have a hat. They're not on a horse. And they're not boys. Though they may call each other Biji, which means boy. Gamajos. For video.
Huh?
Video.
Video. Очень хороший видео получится.
YouTube. Yes, I figured out the Georgian word for YouTube was YouTube. And I told them I was doing this for YouTube. And so I walked a little bit further in this direction, down the hill a bit, not so far as I'd have to climb up the switchbacks, but just far enough to explore a little more, and that's looking off. Tbilisi is way out there. Nice lookout point. And this is looking back from the switchbacks going up the hill. And so this is right where right where that is turning is where I got off originally to walk into the town, Daba. And it's time to walk back. But as I was walking, I passed these guys pitchfork in the hay. Now those pipes are actually gas pipes, and they're all over. I think this is a common feature all over the Soviet Union, these gas pipes, which always freaks me out because what if a car hits one of those? And here is another empty building. Looked like it had been an industrial garage of some sort, but now just abandoned. And you see this kind of thing often in Georgia. These are relics from the Soviet era, where I get the feeling there was a bit more prosperity, or at least incentive for development in the villages, which eventually declined.
Here's some sort of electrical tower that we're going to pass through to get back home. I like those kinds of electrical towers with all the crisscrossing, jagged shapes. And one more cow, just to say hello as I walk back down my street and I look and there's a couple kids kind of waving at me. And that's it. So, we have arrived in Kojori, and we will continue with what turns out to be 4 episodes. Well, I have been wandering around Kojori for a couple of days now, and I am fascinated by the strange combination of decay and, what can I call it, sophistication. This place is growing in price to live here. It's a perfect location. It's about 1,300 meters up, about 4,500 feet above sea level. It's got a lot of interesting homes, and yet when you are on the main drag on the highway, the Kojori highway, its town square is strangely empty. There is a fountain, which yesterday was not working, today is working, and that helped. But it's just a perfunctory fountain, basically in the middle of a parking lot. And then there are 3 chain stores. A Spar, a Nikora, which is the best, has the most food, and an Aversi pharmacy. And then there's a fruit stand, a little independent fruit stand, and another one. And I see on the map there's a couple more little markets that I might run into tomorrow. And yet there's over 1,500 people here, which should provide a bit more business than that. But it doesn't, because so many of the people here, and the reason for the higher prices is that it is people from Tbilisi making this like a second home. It's a great place to get away in the summer. I think there might even be some kind of skiing in the winter up here, although certainly not very professional, but nevertheless sort of a homespun thing. But I'm fascinated by the history. There are very odd, yesterday, and then today I really explored what it turned out to be an old theater. And I mean a theater, not a movie theater. And large building. I didn't know what kind of building it was at first. And then as I went inside, I couldn't tell exactly what period it was from. Maybe the end of the independent era. There was actually a battle here in 1921 with what are called the Junkeris, or the Junkers, who were the cadets who this was one of the last battles before the Soviet Union took over Georgia again. But I'm amazed that if someone came to this place who had a sufficient income and will, they could change this into this absolutely beautiful resort. It wouldn't take much to make the center a very fascinating place. But it hasn't happened. And I even wonder what kind of town government it's got. A small town like this, not far from the city, is called the daba.
And I don't know if it has an independent life. It must have something. But there are so many aspects of it that are left to rot. And then there are aspects of it which, especially when you see individual homes that are just completely beautiful. And in Georgian style, whenever you go to a smaller village, everybody is blocked off from one another, which is really strange, but I guess it prevents the cows from getting in. Nobody can quite see what you're doing, which is an interesting aspect of Georgian life. On one hand, they're very welcoming, and the host family I'm staying with here is certainly very welcoming. And on the other hand, they have these walls outside of their houses so you can't see in at all, which is very different, of course, than America, where, in some places, it is the custom to have an outdoor porch just to say hello to people as they pass by. But Georgians kind of live in their backyards, and I find the backyard here kind of interesting, filled with kakali, which is, I believe, walnuts, and plums, and vashli, which is apples. And everywhere I go, there are plums I can pick, and trees that are full of fruits in perfect Georgian style. But I really like it up here. And then if I am feeling up to it, I'm going to walk all the way back, about 15 miles. Is it 15 miles? No, it's about 15 kilometers, so it's about 9 miles back. But except for the first part, it's all downhill. Once you get to the Udzo monastery, it's all downhill. But anyway, this is Kojori. I hope you enjoy it. And tomorrow I'm going to try to get up to the fortress, which I'll talk about when I do that tomorrow. And I can see it from here. It's tempting me.
So that is the Azeula fortress that I decided to try to get to the next day. This is actually the place that I stayed, that little stone door, and I'm leaving. I was staying in the bottom part here, and you'll see that door again. It's really a fascinating door with like children's chalk drawings on it. I found that fascinating. So I'm going to leave. I have to close this huge metal door, and now I'm out in the street, and I am heading towards the fortress. Now, the fortress is really the most important sight to see here. And I'm passing these wonderful, I just love decayed fences and buildings. I have a theory about Georgia. There's a lot of recent kind of trashy, junky stuff. But if you leave anything out long enough in Georgia, it eventually becomes beautiful as it decays. And this is looking at a forest. This is like a creek running through this dark hollow. Kind of a fascinating place. A calf feeding on what? Pomegranate leaves or some sort of fruit tree leaf. And then just looking at some of the houses from, the walk along the road. It's a kind of a country road. There is a very tiny little fruit stand later. I didn't get a photo of it or anything like that. But this just gives you an idea of some of the trees that I passed
as I was walking along this way, evidently not smoothly enough. But again, my theory about decay and the beauty of it here. Now I'm just going to continue walking, and that's really fascinating. So you have the wall, but then there's a nice little garden there. And I continue walking on my way to the Azeula fortress. And actually, almost all the way there are houses along the way. And no mean dogs on this trip, although there are some, and I quote, bored, angry dogs that are supposed to be on the way to the Udzo monastery. But we'll see when I actually do that in a couple of days here. And some of the houses are quite nice, like that one. And as I walked along, I saw different houses that appealed to me in different ways. And this is just going down the road. Now I'm actually getting closer. I would say that looking down this road, this is a newer house, not particularly interesting, but this is only about, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes away from the Azeula Monastery. And you see these nice yellow, reminds me of Switzerland and the trails there, signs pointing the way to go. And they are also in Latin script, so that's very helpful. And you can see the Azeula fortress there. And so, one rather ugly structure being built there. Unfortunately, they just built a lot of these big, oversized cement structures. Now, this vehicle is an army vehicle pulling away from me, and actually, a man in a Jeep just before him stopped me and told me I couldn't go any further. And that was very disappointing. I really wanted to get to the Azeula fortress, and that's about as close as I got. I was actually much closer than it looks like. I had gotten further than this, but this was a good place to stop and look back at the fortress. And evidently the views from up there are really beautiful. And if you ever go, get yourself there. He said I could come back at noon. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning when I was there, and I didn't feel like waiting around for several hours. So I walked back, past a little park on the way, and this area here across from the park had some very nice buildings, including one behind this big fenced, walled-in area. But before I could do that, I have to look at little guy walking down the street, friendly dog, and you can kind of see this big, huge house behind the fence there, the walled fence, and then some hay being covered. Well, that's nice. Someone's feeding some animals, probably cows. And so I continued on down the road, and one thing I'm going to do right now, these are grapevines hanging over these pipes, and I'll talk about the pipes again a little bit later. But, so there's grapevines, there's plums, there's apples, there's pears, there's cherries, all sorts of fruit everywhere you go here. And this is one of the features of Georgia. It is such a well-stocked land when it comes to provisions and what can grow there. It has an environment that's a lot like California in some places. Georgia is known for being the first place on earth to ferment wine. But they also have so many other kinds of fruits. And these are just literally wild or somewhat wild fruit trees everywhere you go. There's some sort of blackberry or raspberry growing there. It's just endless quantities of fruit. And those are walnuts. Yeah. And you keep looking around, it's darker, but wait, there's something red there, something purple there.
Yeah. So if you're ever in Georgia in the late summer, actually all the way through the summer, just go to any like local fruit stand and get some fresh fruit. And who's that guy in that mirror there? Now, this is to go back to this concept of pipes. Now, this pipe goes over the road and down to the other side, and it's filled with gas for heating and for stoves and cooking. And this was a Soviet thing. They did this. You'll see this in other documentaries about small Soviet villages and such. These above ground gas pipes are just incredibly bizarre to me. I just think, I'm going to hit one. A decorated vehicle on the side of the road. I just love these shapes of the power towers being underneath it. Now, I'm looking at this power station, and this is on the power station grounds. There's no one stopping you from going in here. There's a wide open, broken fence. And yet this is right near the power station for the little town of Kojori. And so I'm looking in here. There's all sorts of insulators, white broken insulators that kind of tempted me. Some of them weren't so bad. And I was thinking, what could I do with those? And maybe someday, if I come up with some idea, I'll go back up there and get some, since they're just kind of semi-broken on the ground. And this is just, I love the texture of this wood, and so I decided just to give you some texture, because who needs dull white walls and bad wallpaper when you could have a texture like this? And I believe texture like this is what we're meant to feast on, in a sense.
Well, thanks for coming with us today on Georgian Crossroads. It turns out this will be a 3-part series on Kojori and this area. So we're going to spend an entire episode just on the abandoned theater, I think. Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. And today what we're going to do is the 3rd part in our series on our little trip to Kojori. It's only, 45 minutes from Liberty Square by bus. 1 lari gets you there. I spent 3 nights for... what was it, about 80 lari a night, about $25 a night. Not bad, cheap. And tomorrow we're going to walk all the way back to Lake, which should be very interesting. But today what we're going to do is we're just going to explore one building. I don't know much about it. I've tried to find out, but I haven't found out anything. If you happen to be someone who knows something about the building we're going to discover today, then please leave a message and let me know what exactly I'm exploring. It's right in the center of town. It's an old theater, not a movie theater, but it had a stage, a proscenium arch. It was a theater. When does it go back to? I'm not exactly sure, but come with me and let's explore it.
So, from the center of town, there is this archway that actually leads from the street down into this almost a park area, but there is this theater just kind of standing there. And when I saw it on the first afternoon of my visit to Kojori, there is a part in me that absolutely must explore abandoned buildings, especially buildings like this. This is the actual address of the building if you want to find it, although I think once you get off at the central bus stop, you would certainly find this. You could just go up for an afternoon. Now, this was a weird thing. There's just all these bottle caps, plastic bottle caps, and I figured in my, I don't know what, that there was some kind of game to be being played with them, maybe getting them on that one little brick or something. But I entered the building where I did find a lot of the plastic bottles that those caps belong to, and decided, let's see what's here. I had seen someone else coming out of the building, and it occurred to me, well, this is Georgia. People don't get up in arms if you go into a building, which in other places you would be chased out of by, if not dogs, at least people wanting to keep you safe. There was nothing to keep anyone safe in this building. A 10-year-old child could wander in here, and given the Georgians' ability to cross a busy street without getting hit by cars, probably be pretty safe. But I was fascinated by this place. I think what fascinates me, and this has fascinated me most of my life, are decayed buildings. Particularly the grander, the better. There's something almost like God reclaiming the building, bringing it back to the elements. I mean, if you came here in another 100 years, it didn't have the fine style of Art Nouveau. I assumed it was made maybe during the Soviet period. It had a tin roof, not a well-designed roof, but it seemed like some sort of sheet metal material. And as I walked through here, those bookshelves really tempted me. That's my own issue. But as I walked through here, just these shapes coming, I love the dark shapes, the cutting and angular shapes. I love the floors that are disappearing into the ground. I was told that someone bought this place, some very rich man, and then nothing ever happened with it again, which I think you could probably save the outlying structure and rebuild it. Or you could tear it down and just leave the front up and maybe some other parts and leave it as a structure in a park or something like that. But of course, I like these crisscrossing black patterns in the sky. I've always loved that effect, and I'm completely drawn to it. So, when I went in, I went through these doors and wanted to look beyond. There's the very high, at least 3 floors, roof that's cracked. You can see the tin. But I went up the stairs into the next layer. I'm about 2 layers in right now. There's an old counter there. Maybe they've collected tickets there. I don't know. But when I went in, I saw that this wasn't a movie theater. It was originally designed as what you would call the legitimate theater, or just a real theater, complete with proscenium arch. And you can see going back there. Now the floor is all gone, and you can see that the architecture that held up the roof has collapsed. I have the feeling there's a story about the life of this building. It doesn't have the ornamentation. It really feels like a product of maybe the 1920s or 30s Soviet Union, There it is in color, some of the parts of the chairs, but I'm guessing those are later additions to the theater. And I would guess also that this has been collapsed for at least 2 decades. Maybe it is a result of Georgia's civil war in the 1990s. So back around the front, again, I think this part could be saved as part of a structure of a park. And these walls seem solid enough. They're just cement. But nevertheless, I didn't go down underneath, although I have in other buildings. There was an asylum on Roosevelt Island in New York City that I used to go down into the total darkness and bring friends down there and then turn off the lights, the whatever flashlights we had, and just tell them, this may be the only chance you ever get to experience total darkness. Yes, I could not get any further into the building because of the collapsed floor, so I decided to go around to the side. And again, this is what lets me know that it's Soviet era, because look at these. If it had been any earlier, Georgia was taken over by the Soviet Union in 1921. If this had been made before that, those would have been rounded curves. They would have been designed much closer to something like Art Nouveau. But this blocky construction definitely has a Soviet feel to it. And this is now inside the back. I'm basically standing under the proscenium arch and the stage. The stage would have been that darker line. And there's the proscenium arch. The curtain would have hung in front of that. You can see more of the collapsing roof. And again, this is not great architecture, but nevertheless, it was big, it was grand. And if this was at the center of the town, one of the things I've mentioned several times is my feeling that this town doesn't have a center. Had this building survived independence, I think it would have had the necessary ingredient to a center. It would have been a summer place to come to watch theater performed. The way it is, people bring their children up here to play in the summers to get them out of the city. Now I'm going around to the back of the building, and there's trash on the ground. It's not that interesting, but nevertheless, like I said, had this building been taken care of, I think it would have been something to rally the town around instead of having essentially two convenience stores and a drugstore at the heart. And there are some parks. But the parks are not that big a deal. They're good. I'm glad they have parks. Good for the children to play. But one thing I noticed was these trash bags. Someone had evidently come along, and maybe they came along and were cleaning it up. Or maybe they were just bringing their garbage here. I don't know. And if they were cleaning it up, they didn't finish. They left the bags there, and the bags are slowly being torn open by, obviously, birds and dogs and such. Now, around to the front, not directly connected, is this old building, which just looking at the architecture, this feels older. This feels from before 1921. Has a bit more of the flair of late 19th century up through independence, Georgia, from the Russian Empire up through independence after World War I. Now that is a perfect example of what happens in Georgian culture these days, a sterile building. But if you walk up just a bit further to 38 Yunkarebi Street, you'll find this building. And this building is interesting. I asked about it, and it turns out it was an orphanage. It was a place for children who didn't have parents. And the orphanage was empty. And again, that would have been a central building, and I still think it is a central building that you could reuse. Likewise, this building. These three buildings would have formed, I think, much of the center of the town. And this guy had a very interesting presence. He wasn't mean at all, as much as he was kind of like almost a warning. He was just sitting there, he was just barking, wasn't coming towards me. I actually saved some meat and threw towards him. And he didn't, when I came back, he wasn't grateful at all. But again, more buildings that abandoned, or this looks like obviously something more modern that was started and then abandoned. But if you cross the street and walk down on the other sidewalk, you get this kind of lovely, fenced-in sidewalk. There's older, more beautiful buildings from the end of the 19th century. Quite fascinating.
So there you are, our mysterious theater. Creepy. I love this place. I love old decayed buildings, and this is a wonderful old decayed building to explore. Thanks for coming along with me, and come back for part 4 in our series. Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power. I am your host, and this is the last in a series of 4 videos on my little trip to Kojori, which is a little village. It's more than a village. It's a small town, but it doesn't have many amenities there. A couple of little stores, one drugstore, a couple of other things, not much, but it is actually a pretty important place. But I'm leaving there today. And in fact, I won't be in the village very long in this video, because what I decided to do is, after taking the bus up here, I've decided to walk all the way back. And the trip took me about 5.5 hours, and it was a great way to get exercise. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning to start. Well, actually, I was on the road by 6:30. I woke up at 6. So let's come with me, and I will show you where we're going today as we walk through the quiet streets of Kojori in the morning to get to the trailhead. Walking through the quiet streets of Kojori, going towards the Uzo Monastery, I am actually following the advice, though in reverse, from Peter Naismith's book, Walking in the Caucasus, Georgia. And I recommend this book for suggestions of many different walking trails in the country. Now, there was one thing he mentioned on the way up to the Uzo Monastery that kind of had me a little worried. He said, right before you get to the monastery, there's a little road that kind of juts off to the side, and he says you don't want to take that road coming down. Now, I was going up, not coming down, but he said it's because he said there were bored, angry dogs there. The only thing I ever worry about here in Georgia are bored, angry dogs. And it's not that I'm afraid of dogs. It's just that I know there are some bored, angry dogs, and you just don't want to meet them. So as I'm walking through this area, I am reminded of a strange little puppet movie that was called Dreams of the Kojori Forest. which featured strange, I don't know, crows, penguins? Well, let's call them crows. And at one point, Louis Armstrong shows up in this thing. You can look this up on YouTube and find it. But now I was in the Kojori forest. And what kind of dreams would I have? And it was actually quite a stunning hardwood forest where I was walking right now. And eventually there would be even more larger trees. I actually love this part of the trail. It's not a trail, it's kind of a road, obviously. But there would be pine trees further up. But this section here was lovely. This was a spot where I guess they built it so you could stop and rest. There was probably a drinking fountain or an artesian well coming through a pipe, but I didn't stop. It was early in the morning, and I was on my way up to the top of the mountain. And so I passed the dogs, but I'll mention more of them in a moment. And they actually put cement on the road going up, which was a good thing, because otherwise it would probably be impossible to get a car up there given the steepness of it. Here's a map showing exactly how far I will be going. Let me show you how I walked, and this will give you an idea. This is what Google had for me walking along the way. Now, it was basically correct. There were some issues. There was a cutoff that was a bit tricky at a power station, a little power station, and you have to kind of stay right in front of the power station and not follow the obvious road there. But it takes you eventually to Turtle Lake. And don't believe Google at Turtle Lake, above Turtle Lake. You can keep walking around it. But I finally got up there, and there was a shrine, wonderful St. George shrine. Well, I am at the top of the Udzo Monastery mountain, and it's about 7:45 in the morning, and I passed the bored angry dogs without incident, because they were more interested in each other than me. But now the long part starts, all downhill to Vake Park and my home. So, a beautiful morning. It's going to be quite sunny. I had shade all the way up. I hope I get a lot more on the way down. We'll see. The great thing about this was it was just like gently up and down, almost all down on the way. And then I kept walking from there and came to a kind of a little meadow, sunburnt, looking over what would have been really great views had it been a different sort of day. The clouds and evaporation of moisture was making it kind of hazy. Not that that was a distraction at all. It was a beautiful, beautiful time up there. But this wasn't right at the top. It was down a little bit further as I traveled. Tbilisi is way down there in the haze. The sun is burning off all the clouds from the last few days. Now this is worth stopping for. And one thing I would say as a word of caution, this was good. If you have problems with your knees, I wouldn't take this trail down because some of it does get not super steep. It's not climbing at all, but it is. It does descend, and the worst part for certain people would be the places, and they weren't very long compared with some other trails I've been on, where what's under your feet is nothing but gravel, small stones, things like that. I did end up tripping once, and I got worried because my knee bent in an odd shape, but fortunately nothing actually happened. But that is something to watch for. Meanwhile, it was just glorious weather going down, mostly on the cool side. Occasionally I'd come into the open, but up this far, this is still, I don't know, 3,500 feet or more. Still quite cool for a summer day, although it was supposed to be 34 degrees, 94 degrees once I got to Tbilisi. But fortunately, there was still kind of a hazy cloud cover that was burning off slowly. And roads like this were wonderful. There was one place I came to, quite in the middle of the road, that looked like it was prohibited to walk through, but it was the only way through. It wasn't that long. There were some buildings that looked a bit like bunkers there, and I just walked through. It's Georgia. No one was there. No one cared. But if you do come to such a thing, think about it. This was the Lost Hut. It was a place you could stop. You could camp overnight. You could bring a camper there before taking off. And this is on the way down, so I'm going to Turtle Lake, not Europe Square. And that's sick. That is, okay, let's say this correctly. That's Tikneti down there, which is actually above the end of Vake. And I'm looking down at Vake there, but I'll get a better view of it soon. But all the way down, you're getting these wonderful views. Well, I still have at least an hour to go on my walk down the hill. It'll probably end up being 3.5 to 4 hours. I'm going to take the tram across Vake Park down from Turtle Lake as a shortcut. I mean, I've done the walk down there several times, so I'm not missing anything. But this is a fantastic trip to take. Some spectacular views. Fortunately, the sun has gone behind clouds, which makes it more bearable. Otherwise, there'd be some stretches here. I think in the middle of the summer, this would be pretty hot. I knew it would be a cooler day, and the clouds have come back, and that's a very good thing. And there have been a couple of sections I wouldn't recommend for people who have problems walking. Sections with a lot of gravel and scree on the road, just kind of washed out, leaving the gravel there. But they aren't very long, and taking a stick would be a very good thing, finding a stick along the way. Not at the beginning. This section you certainly don't need a stick for, but certainly once it starts going uphill past this little power station, which is like the last human thing you see for at least an hour or more. until you get up to the Udzo monastery. But coming down, I don't think I'd like to walk up. But coming down, going up to Kojori, amazing trip. And I passed what Peter Naismith and his guide walking the Caucasus calls angry bored dogs. There were literally 4 of them at this turnoff to this village, which I was sure not to take. But nevertheless, they were right on the guarding the entrance. But fortunately, they were more interested in each other, and I think it was mating season, so I dodged that bullet. Okay. Now, we have a choice to make. This way or this way. Which way should I go? I think it's this way, because I've been going the opposite way for a while, and this looks like a better trail. So, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is it. Okay, and then there's a place that says panoramic view. Doesn't look like it's that far up. I think I'm going to go look at that, as opposed to go to Europe Square.
And this is walking out to the panoramic point, looking straight down over one of the edges. This is like a spit of land that goes over. You're walking at this point towards Tsikneti, which is the back end of Vake, hovering above it, the old Soviet place for the rich elites, actually, because they like to be slightly apart. But Vake was like that as well. This is the panoramic view, so I'm looking across at the mountains. I've just come down across Tsikneti. And you can see there's higher mountains, always higher mountains on these lesser Caucasus. You just think you're at the top, and then there's another bump of a old volcanic mountain further beyond. And now I'm just passing Bagebi, and now I'm looking down at Vake, and you see these taller buildings, and there's the black and white of the Axis towers, and right below that is where I live, so that is where I am going towards. And then a closer look at Vake, and let's continue. And my old favorite power lines. I just love the black geometric shapes crisscrossing the sky.
Well, this is near the end of the trip. What a fantastic walk. I will do this again sometime when the weather is cooler. And I'm up here on the overlook on the way to the Svan Tower, which I've never been up to. I've seen it from below, but that'll be nice to get near it. And then take the tram down the mountain to Vake Park, and I'm home. What a great way to walk.
And so that's the Svan Tower that was part of the ethnic heritage center there, the ethnographic buildings. And the double black and white tower, I am right below that in Vake. And here we are. There's Turtle Lake. Now the map will tell you to come around on the left here down past the Svan Tower. I've always found it better to just keep going straight. You come to another lookout point and then walk straight from there and come around that way. That seems to be the way the trail is actually going. Rather than do the last 45 minutes of walking, I was very tired by this point. This was well over 5 hours of walking, and I was, it was now officially about 34 degrees, and you could feel as soon as you got over Turtle Lake, the weather changed noticeably and got warmer. So I hopped on the aerial tramway and went down what they call the ropeway here, and went down from Turtle Lake down to within 2 blocks of my home in Bake on Chavchavadze Avenue. And this is only half of the ride. I forgot to turn my camera on for the other part, but that's okay. You can also take this going up, which will save you a lot of work. Yeah, so just take a taxi or a bus to the Axis Towers and the Agro Hub, Carrefour, right up there on Chavchavadze, right at the park, or you can just go to Bake Park. And I'm coming down to my neighborhood. It's kind of nice descending. I saved myself 45-minute walk in the hot weather. I mean, I could have easily done it. I've done it before. So there's the Axis Towers, and where I live is not far from that. Meanwhile, there's other rather boring modern buildings here. Although I'm kind of attached to the Whistle building that we're passing here as some sort of early independence kind of construction. And there we are, landing.
And so finally, I am back in Vake. And I feel like I just took a walk back down the hill. It wasn't easy. It did get quite warm. It was about 34 degrees, about 94 degrees. Once I came down from Turtle Lake, quite warm. But having taken the little aerial tram down, it was simple. I just felt like, okay, I'm back. I just walked home. And you could do that too. It's a very easy trip to do. It's easy to find a place on Airbnb. They don't get any money from me, but that's one way to find a nice, inexpensive place to spend a day or two there. But the walk back was wonderful. And of course, you just watched everything, so you know how wonderful it was. And I would suggest doing it perhaps not in the middle of summer, but it was nice to get away from the heat by being up there. And so I highly recommend it. But I think it would be even better in the spring or the autumn. So think about doing that. Meanwhile, hey, subscribe to the channel. Have you done that yet? Do it now. You're still here, subscribe. Hit like, that helps the algorithm find me. There are all sorts of crazy Georgian videos, a lot less interesting than mine, that have millions of views, thousands and thousands and thousands of views. Why don't mine get more views? It's because these algorithmic things don't know about me. And the reason they don't know about me is you need to press like and subscribe, etc. And share it with your friends if you think it's an interesting video, or if the channel's interesting. Share the channel with your friends. And if you want to help me, you can subscribe and you can contribute. And there's a PayPal link below. Well, thanks for coming. I hope you found that interesting. You could have watched it in one chunk or several. It wasn't too onerous, I hope. And we'll do this again sometime, where sometimes I can take bits from my past and reconfigure them. In this case, as I did, since this was a trip I took last year. But anyway, thanks for coming along. And we will meet again. Drobit from Georgia. This is Byrne.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.